There is a kind of silence that belongs only to a nursery after midnight, and I had learned its every shade. I had stood the night watch outside the royal nursery of Harrowgate Palace for 3 years by then, long enough to know the small sounds a sleeping house makes, and more importantly, the ones it does not. I knew the particular creak of the 7th stair in the west turret when the cold pressed it in the early hours. I knew the way the long case clock in the children's antechamber gathered itself for a half-beat before it struck. I knew that Princess Malin, who was 8, talked in her sleep when she had eaten too many of the kitchen's honey wafers, and that Prince Joran, who was 10 and proud of being 10, slept with one foot always pushed out from beneath his blanket, as if he meant to be ready to run somewhere even in his dreams. I knew the breathing of that corridor the way a man knows his own pulse, without thinking, until the moment it changes. That night it changed, and I felt it before I understood it. My name is Corwin Ashby, and I was a king's guard of the royal house of Harrowgate, in the kingdom of Eldermore, sworn to the post outside the door behind which the 2 children of Queen Saralyn slept. The queen reigned and reigned well. Her husband, Prince Consort Aldrich, was a quiet man who loved his children loudly and the rest of the court not at all. I mention them because everything I am about to tell you turns on how close the danger came to those 2 sleeping children, and how, by the narrowest margin a man can stand inside, it did not reach them. The queen would learn of that margin only afterward, and what she heard of it, overheard, really, in the cold gray hour before dawn, would leave her standing in the middle of her own corridor unable to move, as if the floor of the world had tilted beneath her, and she had only just understood how nearly she had fallen through it. But that is the end. I will not rush to it. A guard learns patience or he learns nothing, and the whole point of what I did that night was that I did not move too soon and I did not move too late. The power, if there was any power in me at all, was in the not moving until the exact instant that moving was right. Restraint is not the absence of action. It is action held on a leash so short it looks, to the untrained eye, like stillness. Let me set the post. The royal nursery at Harrowgate was not a single room, but a small suite at the end of the East Children's Gallery, on the 2nd floor above the Rose Court. There was the children's antechamber first, with its long case clock and its window seat and the low shelves of Malin's painted wooden animals. Then, through an inner door, the 2 bedchambers, the prince's and the princess's, with a connecting door between them that the children insisted on leaving open. Outside the antechamber and the gallery itself stood my post, a single sentry station at the head of the gallery, where the corridor turned. From there I could see the whole length of the gallery in one direction and the door to the antechamber in the other. 1 man, 1 post, 1 door. By the protocols of the household, no one passed that point after the children were put to bed without the written night pass of the captain of the guard, countersigned by the nursery governess, the Lady Briarwin, who slept in a small room of her own off the antechamber, and who had the keys. That was the system. It was a good system. Good systems are made by people who have already imagined the bad night and built the wall before it came. The trouble with a good system is that it makes everyone inside it feel that the bad night will never come, and so they grow careless about the wall and lean on it, and forget it is the only thing between them and the dark. I never forgot. That was my whole trade. The night I am speaking of was the night of the autumn levee, when the queen received the realm's high houses and the foreign envoys in the long gallery downstairs, and the whole palace was lit and loud, and full of strangers in finery who had every reason to be there and a few who, I would come to learn, had no honest reason at all. A levee is a guard's hardest night precisely because everything is permitted. The doors are open. The corridors are full of people who belong. 100 faces pass that on any ordinary night would each be a question, and on a levee night they are all, by leave of the crown, an answer. It is the night when the wall has the most gates in it, and a man who means to slip through a wall waits for exactly such a night. I did not know, When I took my post at the 11th hour and watched the Lady Briarwind turn down the lamps, and heard the children's breathing settle into the deep, slow rhythm of real sleep, that someone downstairs was counting the same hours I was, and waiting. I knew only my corridor, and that it was quiet, and that quiet was good. The first wrong thing was small. It was so small that a lesser-trained man, or a tired one, would have let it pass, and the whole night would have ended differently, and I would not be telling you this. At 1:15 midnight the music downstairs changed. I could feel it more than hear it, the way the floor of an old palace carries a great room's mood up through the stone, and the levee began to break up. I heard the first carriages on the gravel of the rose court below my window, and shortly after I heard footsteps come up the east stair toward my gallery, even, unhurried, confident footsteps, a man's tread in good shoes. That was not in itself wrong. The household physician sometimes came up at night. A footman might be sent. The Lady Briarwind herself sometimes walked the gallery before she slept. But I had stood that post 3 years, and I knew every tread that had any business on that stair, and this one I did not know. It belonged to no one I had ever heard come up that stair before, and a man does not learn a corridor for 3 years without his ear keeping a ledger. His mind has not even troubled to read. So I came to attention, and I watched the head of the stair, and I waited. A man rose into the lamplight. He was perhaps 40, dressed in the dark-fitted coat of a senior household officer, with a chain of office at his breast that caught the lamp, the sort of chain a steward or a controller wears, a thing that says I belong here without the wearer needing to say it aloud. He carried a leather dispatch case under one arm and a folded paper in his free hand, and he came down the gallery toward my post with the easy, slightly bored manner of a man who has walked 100 such corridors on 100 such errands, and expects this one to be no different. He had a good face, an honest face, the kind that opens doors. I have learned to distrust good faces on strange treads. The two together are a lie that has practiced itself in a mirror. "Evening," he said, and gave me the small nod that men of rank give men of duty, courteous and meaning nothing. "Late one, they do go on, these levees." He held out the folded paper as he came, the way a man holds out a thing he expects you to glance at and wave through. "Night pass for the nursery. Lady Briarwind sent for me, one of the children's unwell, she thinks. I'm to look in." And there it was, the first lie, laid down smooth as silk on a salver, and held out to me as if it were nothing at all. I did not take the paper. I did not move from the post. I let the silence sit between us for 1 beat, then 2, the way I had let 1,000 silences sit, and I watched what the silence did to his good honest face. The silence did a great deal. A man who carries a true night pass on a true errand is not troubled by a guard who takes his time. He waits. He is nowhere he must be that he should not be. He may even be glad of the rigor, because the rigor is what keeps his own children safe on the nights he is not the one walking the corridor. But this man's good honest face tightened at the corners of the eyes, just slightly, in the way a face tightens when its owner has rehearsed a thing, and finds the rehearsal is not playing out as written. He had expected the paper to be glanced at and waved through. He had built his whole night on the paper being glanced at and waved through. And here was a guard who had not glanced at it, who had not reached for it, who had simply gone still and looked at him as if he were a sum that did not add. "Lady Briarwind sent for you," I said. It was not a question. I said it the way you lay a stone on a table to see if the man across from you will pick it up. "She did," he said, and smiled, and the smile was a good smile, warm and a little tired, the smile of a man put upon by a long night and patient about it. "The little prince," she said, "or the princess, I confess I didn't catch which, a fever. She wanted the night pass brought up and the physician's man fetched in." He extended the paper an inch further. "It's all in order. Captain Vale signed it not 20 minutes ago, downstairs." Now here is the thing he could not have known, and the thing that undid him, and the thing I want you to understand because It is the whole spine of what kept those children safe. The Lady Briarwyn did not send for anyone. The Lady Briarwyn, when one of the children was unwell, did not send for a household officer with a dispatch case. She came out of her own little room off the antechamber, in her gray wrapper with her gray plait down her back, and she stood at my post herself, and she told me to my face, and I went or I sent as she directed, and the night pass, if one was even needed at that hour with her standing there as living authority, came down from the antechamber, not up from the levee. The protocol of that nursery ran one way only, outward from the children, never inward toward them on the word of a stranger. The Lady Briarwyn had built it that way herself, years before I came, and she had said to me on my first night in her dry, quiet voice, "Mr. Ashby, no one comes to my children on a piece of paper. They come on my word or they do not come. Remember that and you may forget everything else." I had not forgotten it. I have never forgotten it. It was the wall, and this man had just walked into it without knowing it was there, and the soft sound you would have heard, if you had ears for such things, was the sound of his whole plan beginning, very quietly, to come apart. "Captain Vale," I said. "Captain Vale," he agreed, warmly, sure of the name because it was the right name, the true name, the name anyone who had asked one careful question downstairs would have learned. He had done his work. He had learned the captain's name, and he had had a chain of office made or borrowed, and he had had a paper drawn up that would, by lamplight, to a tired man, pass. He had imagined the bad night well. He had imagined every part of it except the one part that mattered, which was the old woman in the gray wrapper who had built the wall, and the man she had told to remember. "Then you'll have no trouble," I said, "if I send for the Lady Briarwyn to come out and receive you herself." It was a simple thing to say. It cost me nothing to say it. And it cost him everything, because there was nothing he could say back that did not break him on the wall. If the errand were true, he would welcome it. Of course, he would say, by all means fetch her, the more eyes the better where the children are concerned. That is what a true man says. The truth has no fear of more witnesses. If the errand were false, he had 3 roads, and every one of them ran off a cliff. He could insist there was no time. The child was feverish. Every minute mattered. But that only sharpened the urgency he had himself manufactured into the very thing that would bring the whole house running, and he did not want the house running. He could turn and go, abandon the night, melt back down the stair and into the breaking crowd of the levee, and try again on some other night with some other paper. But a man who turns and walks away from a child he has just sworn is feverish marks himself as surely as a man who runs. Or he could do the third thing, the thing I was watching his hands for the whole time my mouth was making polite words, the thing that all the careful preparation and all the good honest face had been building a road toward. He could decide that the wall was only one man, and that one man could be got past. I want to be very precise here, because this is the part where everything is decided, and where the kind of power I had, the only kind a guard truly has, either holds the line or fails it. It is not the power to strike. Anyone can strike. A drunk man can strike. A frightened man can strike. A cruel man strikes most readily of all. The power I had was the power not to stand at the exact center of the moment with my own violence held on a leash so short it did not show, so that when the instant came I could let out precisely as much of it as the instant required and not 1 ounce more, and then gather it back in. That is the discipline. That is the whole of it. A guard who cannot hold himself cannot hold a door, and a man who would do harm to a sleeping child counts, more than anything, on the people in his way being unable to hold themselves, on us being slow or hasty or asleep on our feet at the bad end of a long night. I was none of those things. I had given my long years of nights to being none of those things, on the chance, the small, terrible, never quite believed chance, that one night it would matter. This was the night. He chose the third road, but he chose it cleverly, which is to say he did not choose it all at once. The clumsy ones lunge. He did not lunge. He sighed instead, a small put-upon sigh, and he let his shoulders drop in the way of a man yielding gracefully to a fool's caution, and he said, "Of course, send for her. I'd not have it any other way." And he took half a step back, ceding ground, the very picture of patience. And in taking that half step back he turned his body a few degrees, and his free hand, the one that had held the paper, drifted down and back toward the small of his back beneath the dark coat, the way a man's hand drifts toward the place where a man keeps a thing he does not want seen. I had been watching that hand the whole time. I had been watching it the way you watch the one card in another man's deal that he keeps glancing at himself. There are tells the body cannot suppress, no matter how good the face above it has practiced its lie. A man reaching for a comb does not square his weight onto the balls of his feet first. A man reaching for a handkerchief does not in the same instant let his eyes flick, just once, just for the length of a heartbeat, past my shoulder to the door of the antechamber, measuring the distance, the way a runner measures the gap before the gun. The good honest face had not flicked. The face never flickers. That is what makes a good face dangerous. But the body beneath it had told me three separate truths in the space of a breath: the weight forward, the hand back, the eyes measuring glance at the door, and three truths together are not a suspicion any longer. Three truths together are a certainty, and certainty is what a guard waits for, and prays he never gets. I had it now, and the having of it made the world go very quiet and very slow and very clear, the way it does, I am told, for men in the last seconds before the only thing that has ever mattered. I did not draw. I did not shout. I did not strike. Those would all have been moving too soon, and moving too soon is its own kind of failure, because a guard who breaks before the wrong is fully shown is a guard who has guessed, and a guard who guesses wrong has laid hands on an innocent man at the door of the royal children, and there is no honor in that and no safety either. I had been taught, and I believed, that you let the wrong commit itself fully enough that there is no longer any doubt, and not one instant past that the whole art is in finding the seam between too soon and too late, which is the width of a single heartbeat, and stepping into it. So I waited for his hand to close on the thing at the small of his back. I waited for the choice to become a deed. I waited until there could be no court in the realm, and no voice in my own head on the long nights after that could say I had moved against a man who had done nothing. And then, in the seam of that single heartbeat, I moved. I did not move the way you might imagine. There was no flourish in it, no shout, no swing. I had been at attention, perfectly still for the whole length of the conversation, and stillness, when it is true and not merely posed, is not the opposite of motion. It is motion gathered and waiting, a drawn bow that looks at rest. When I came off the post I came off it all at once and entirely, the way the bow lets go, and I crossed the small distance between us before his hand had finished closing on whatever he meant to draw. I did not strike him. Mark that. I want it marked, because in the days afterward there were those who told the story as though I had felled him, as though there had been some great violence done in that gallery, and there was not. The whole of what I did was to take his reaching wrist in my left hand and turn it, not break it, turn it, the way you turn a key, so that his arm came up and away from the small of his back, and the thing he had been reaching for stayed where it was, undrawn. And with my right forearm I brought him, off balance and surprised, against the cold stone of the gallery wall, where I held him, my weight settled and certain, his cheek to the stone, his turned arm pinned, his good honest face at last doing something honest, which was to show, naked and astonished, the thing it had been built to hide. He went rigid. Then he heaved against me once, hard, a strong man, a trained man. I could feel that much in the set of his shoulders, and I let him learn in the half-second of that heave that he would not move, that the wall behind him and the wall I had made of myself were the same wall now, and that he had run his whole clever night straight into it. Then he went still, the way a snared thing goes still, gathering for some new cleverness. "Don't," I said very quietly close to his ear, just the one word. A guard learns that one quiet word, placed right, does more than 100 shouted ones. There are 2 children asleep on the other side of that door, and you are not going through it, and the only thing you get to decide now is how much trouble you make for yourself on the way down the stairs. With my pinning hand I reached, without taking my weight off him, to the small of his back beneath the dark coat, to learn at last what his hand had been closing on. My fingers found it. It was not a blade, though I had half expected a blade. It was smaller and stranger, and in its way far worse, and the understanding of what it was when it came to me was the first cold breath of how much larger this night was than the one man pinned against my wall. But I will come to that. In that moment, I knew only that it was a thing he had meant to use on the other side of that door, and that he would not now use it, and that was, for the space of 3 heartbeats, enough. Then the corridor woke up. The Lady Briarwin's door opened. I heard it before I saw it, the particular small complaint of its hinge, which I had heard 100 quiet nights and never once been so glad of. She came out into the gallery in her gray wrapper with her gray plait down her back, exactly as I had always known her to come, a candle in her hand and her old face sharp with the instant, total waking of a woman who has spent 30 years sleeping with one ear turned toward children. She took in the gallery in a single sweep, the stranger pinned to the stone, the dispatch case fallen where he had dropped it, me with my weight settled and my voice low, and she did not scream, and she did not falter, and she did not ask a single foolish question. She had imagined this night too long ago and built her part of the wall for it. The children, she said, 2 words, the only 2 that mattered. Asleep, I said, untouched. He got no further than my post. Ring the gallery bell, my lady, and send the page for Captain Vale and the duty section, and not one soul through that antechamber door, not the physician, not the prince consort himself, until the captain stands here and says who is who. We do not yet know how many he is. I felt the man against the wall go very still at that, at how many he is, and I knew by that stillness that I had guessed right, and that the night was not over, and that the worst of it was not the man I held but the men I did not. The Lady Briarwin looked at me for one heartbeat with something in her old eyes I had not earned in 3 years of standing my post quietly and earned, apparently, in 3 seconds of not letting a stranger past it. Then she turned and went to the gallery bell pull by the stair, and she rang it, not the soft single chime that called a page, but the long, climbing, urgent peal that in all my years I had heard rung only twice in drill and never once in earnest, the peal that means to the whole of Harrowgate Palace, the children, come. And all through the great old house, below us and around us, in the dying light of the levee, I heard the palace begin to answer. Captain Vale was the first up the stair, and he came 2 steps at a time with his sword half drawn, which told me he had heard the long peal and known it for what it was. He was a broad, gray, unhurried man on any ordinary day, the kind of officer who had earned his rank by never once being surprised, because he had thought of everything first, and to see him take those stairs at a run was, in its way, as alarming as the man pinned to my wall. He pulled up short at the head of the gallery, and read the scene the way Briarwin had read it in one sweep, and his half-drawn sword went the rest of the way home in its scabbard, which was his way of saying, I have it now, you have done your part. Ashby, he said, report. This man came up the east stair at 1:15 midnight, I said. I kept my weight where it was. I did not let the prisoner go for the comfort of standing easy to make my report. He wore a steward's chain and carried a night pass for the nursery and said the Lady Briarwin had sent for him, a child feverish, he said. The Lady Briarwin sent for no one. When I offered to bring her out to receive him, he made to draw a thing from the small of his back and measured the antechamber door with his eyes. I took him before he drew it. It is still on him. I have not let go of him to retrieve it cleanly, and I'd not have it handled by anyone but you, Captain, with a witness, in case it must answer for itself later in a court. Vale's gray eyes went, for just an instant, to the prisoner's good honest face, and then back to me, and something moved behind them, respect, maybe, or the particular grim satisfaction of an officer whose careful system has just, against all the odds, and on the one night in 3 years it was tested, held. The night pass, he said. The Lady Briarwyn had already retrieved it from where it had fallen and was holding it to her candle. "It is Captain Vale's hand," she said slowly, and my stomach turned cold, because if the pass were truly the captain's hand, then the wall had a hole in it I had not seen. But she went on in her dry, exact, unhurried voice. "It is Captain Vale's hand as a man would copy it who had seen it once and practiced it 10 times. The downstroke of the V is wrong. The captain crosses his 7s. This 7 is uncrossed. And the seal," she tilted it to the light, "the seal is the household seal, true enough, but it is pressed in the new wax that came up only this season, and the captain's true passes this month were all sealed in the old dark wax we are using up first. It is a very good forgery. It is not a good enough one. I have thought many times since about how a plot that had imagined so much, the chain, the case, the practiced hand, the captain's name, the levee night when the wall has the most gates in it, had been undone by the order in which an old woman used up her sealing wax. The bad night is always imagined by clever men. It is defeated, when it is defeated, by the people who do the small, dull, careful things that clever men do not think worth the imagining. "Hold him," said Vale, and 2 of the duty section took the prisoner from me, properly, by both arms, with a third standing off with his hand on his hilt. The way you secure a man you have decided is dangerous. And only when their hands had fully replaced mine did I step back, and feel, for the first time since the man had risen into the lamplight, the long shudder of held effort go out of my own arms. Then Captain Vale, with the Lady Briarwyn holding the candle, and a sergeant of the section bearing witness, reached beneath the prisoner's coat to the small of his back and drew out the thing my fingers had found. He held it up in the candlelight, and for a long moment none of us spoke, because none of us at first understood what we were looking at. It was not a knife. It was not a pistol. It was a small flat case of dark lacquered metal, no bigger than a prayer book, with a sliding panel along one edge, and a faint, oily, sweetish smell came off it that I did not know and did not like. It was the Lady Briarwyn who understood first. She had nursed children through every fever and croup and chill of 30 years, and she knew the smell of the apothecary's shelf the way I knew the tread of the stair. Her old face went, in the candlelight, the gray of cold ash. "Put it down," she said very quietly to the captain, in a voice I had not heard her use before. "Put it down on the stone and do not open the panel and do not, any of you, breathe close over it. That is a vapor case. The apothecaries make them for the sleeping draught they give before a setting of bone. A few breaths and a grown man is under for an hour and remembers nothing of it. There is enough in a case that size to put a room full of children so deeply asleep that—" She stopped. She did not finish it. She did not have to. We all of us finished it, each in his own cold silence, and the gallery that had been merely tense became, in that moment, something colder and graver and far more terrible, the gallery of a thing that had very nearly happened. He had not come to harm the children in the gallery, where a guard stood. He had come to put them so deep asleep that they could be lifted, carried, taken out a window to the Rose Court and a waiting carriage, while the whole palace drank and danced 1 floor below and never heard a sound. He had not come to do a violence. He had come to do a quiet that would have woken in the morning into the loudest grief the realm had ever known. I looked at the small dark case on the cold stone, 3 steps from the door behind which Malin slept talking of honey wafers and Joran slept with 1 foot pushed out ready to run, and I understood, all at once and to the bottom of me, how narrow the seam had been that I had stepped into, and how close, by the width of a single heartbeat, by the order an old woman used up her wax, by a tread I did not know on a stair, the whole house had come to falling through the floor of the world. And then I understood the worst thing, the thing that turned my blood to slow cold water. He had not come alone. No man plans a carriage in the rose court and a window in the dark and a vapor case timed to a levee, and comes to do it with only himself. Somewhere below us, in the breaking crowd, in the dark of the gardens, in the waiting carriages on the gravel, there were others, and they did not yet know that the man on the stair had failed. "Captain," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "He is the first hand, not the whole arm. There is a carriage meant for the rose court and men to drive it, and at least one more inside these walls who told him the levee was the night and the east stair was the way and the captain's name was Vale. He did not learn those things by himself. We have stopped the hand at the door. We have not stopped the arm." Captain Vale looked at me for a long moment, and then he did a thing that from him was the highest words a man could say. He nodded once slowly, and he said, "Then we had best go and find the rest of it before the rest of it learns we are coming." But he did not move yet, and neither did I, because there was one thing that had to come before all the rest, and we both knew it, and it was the only part of the night that was not about catching anyone. It was the children. "My lady," Captain Vale said to Briarwyn, "wake them gently, and dress them warm, and take them by the inner stair to the Queen's own apartments. Not the gallery, the inner stair, with 2 of my section before you and 2 behind. And you do not stop, and you do not open to any face you do not yourself know. And when you are inside the Queen's rooms you bar the door, and you do not open it again to anyone but the Queen herself or me. Can you do that?" "I have done harder," said the Lady Briarwyn, which from her was a small dry mountain of courage, and she went in through the antechamber door to wake the children, and I heard, through the open door, the small ordinary miracle of it. The rustle of bedclothes and her low murmur, and Malin's sleepy unalarmed voice asking was it morning, and Briarwyn saying, "No, lamb, it is a game. We are going to play a quiet game and walk very softly to Mamma's rooms," and Joran's voice, already half awake and proud, saying he would carry his own boots, and not one of them in that moment knowing anything of the small dark case on the stone, or the man on the wall, or the carriage in the dark. That is the whole of what a guard is for. Not that the children should be brave in the danger, that the children should never know there had been a danger at all, and should walk to their mother's rooms in the small hours thinking it a game and grow up and grow old, and never once feel the cold breath of the night that nearly took them. I have had thanks in my life, some of it more than I deserved, but I have never been thanked for the one thing I am proudest of, because the people I did it for never knew it was done. That is the bargain a guard makes. You trade the gratitude for the silence, and you call it a good trade, because the silence is the proof you won. They went out the inner door, the small sleepy procession of them, hemmed about with armed men, and I heard their soft tread fade down toward the Queen's apartments, and the gallery was quieter for their going, and I could turn, at last, with my whole mind, to the arm behind the hand. Captain Vale set the watch. He was very good at it. I learned more about my trade in the next half hour than in 3 years of standing still. He did not raise a general alarm. An alarm would have told the men in the dark that their man had failed, and sent them scattering into a city we could not search. Instead he closed the palace quietly, gate by gate, in the ordinary way the gates close after a levee, so that to anyone watching it looked like nothing but a great house going to bed. He put men, 2 by 2 and unhurried, on every door of the rose court and every mouth of the gardens. And he sent me, because I knew the upper house better than any man living, having watched it sleep 3 years, to walk the east wing from the nursery down, quietly, room by room, and find the inside hand. The one who had told the man on the stair that the levee was the night and the east stair was the way, and the wax, no, not the wax. The wax was the one thing no one had told him, because no one inside had known to. The inside hand had given him everything a clever plotter could be given, and it had not been enough, and the not enough was the order of an old woman sealing wax, and I thought, as I went down the dark wing with my hand near my hilt, that I would never again in my life mock a small, dull, careful habit, my own or any other man's. I found the inside hand in the muniment passage behind the children's gallery, where the old account books and the household keys were kept, and where no one had any business at 1 in the morning on a levee night. It was a footman. A young one. I knew his face. A quiet, willing, unremarkable young man named Pell, who had carried trays and trimmed lamps in the East Wing for a year and more, and whom I had passed 100 times and never once thought a question about, because he belonged, because his face opened doors. He was at the key press with a lamp shuttered to a thread of light, and a ring of the household keys in his hand, and when he saw me in the doorway his face did the thing the man on the stairs face had not done. It crumpled, all at once, into pure naked terror, the terror of a young man who has done a thing far larger than himself and understood, the instant he is caught, exactly how large it was. He did not run, he could not. I filled the doorway. He did not fight. He dropped the keys and they rang on the stone, and he put his back to the key press and slid down it to the floor and put his face in his hands, and he said, through his hands, in a voice that was hardly a voice at all, "Are they, are the children?" And I will tell you a true thing about that moment, a thing that surprised me then and has not stopped surprising me since. I had expected, when I found the inside hand, to feel the clean hot thing a man feels toward a traitor. I did not. The young man on the floor with his face in his hands was so plainly drowning in his own deed, so plainly asking after the children, not as a plotter checks whether his plot has failed, but as a person who has done a wrong asks, in horror, whether the wrong has come true, that the hot clean thing in me cooled into something harder and stranger and sadder, which was the understanding that not every hand in a wicked thing is a wicked hand. Some hands are weak or frightened or owned, or were a fool's hands sold cheap for a reason the fool thought he had to take, and I did not yet know which kind of hand Pell's was. But I knew it mattered which kind, and that a guard who forgets it matters has stopped being a guardian and become only a wall, and a wall does not know the difference between a thief and a frightened boy, and I did not want to be only a wall. "The children are safe," I said, "asleep and safe, and you did not touch them, and the man you let in did not touch them, and now you are going to tell me everything from the very beginning, and the telling is the only road left to you that does not end in the dark." I crouched slowly, so that my eyes were level with his, and I said more quietly, "Who made you do this, Pell?" "He told me." It came out of him in a flood, the way a held thing comes out once the holding breaks, and I let it come, and I listened, and I have wished 100 times since that I had not had to hear it, because it was a sadder and uglier and more ordinary story than any villain's tale, and the ordinary is always the worst, because the ordinary is the part that could have happened to anyone. "His mother was ill," he said. "Truly ill, dying ill, in a poor house at the wrong end of the city, and the physician's man wanted money to keep coming, and the apothecary wanted money for the draughts that eased her nights, and a footman's wage does not stretch to a dying mother. And one evening some months back a gentleman had found him outside the apothecary's shop where he stood counting coins he did not have, and the gentleman had been kind. That was how it began, not with a threat, with kindness. The gentleman had been so very kind and so very understanding, and had pressed money on him for the apothecary as though it were nothing, as though it were what any decent man would do, and had asked nothing at all in return, that month. The next month he had asked a small thing, which gate stood unwatched at the noon change, nothing really. The month after, a smaller seeming thing and a larger one. The names of the night watch, the hours of the nursery, the wax. No, never the wax. Pell had not known about the wax, and by the time the gentleman asked the great thing, the keys and the levee and the east stair, Pell had already given so much that he could not see the road back, and the gentleman had stopped being kind and started, very gently, very regretfully, to remind him of all he had already given, and what it would mean for a dying woman's son to be known for it. He never raised his voice, Pell said, into his hands. Not once, that's the thing of it. He was kind the whole time he was ruining me. He made it feel like the only thing a good son could do. "This gentleman," I said, "his name." And here Pell looked up, and the terror in his face changed into a different and worse fear, the fear of a small man naming a great one, and he whispered a name, and the name went through me like the cold off the river, because it was not a name I had expected, and it was not a name from outside the walls, and it was not a foreign agent or a hired bravo or a stranger at the gate. It was a name from the top of the house. I will not write it yet, the name. Not because I mean to play with you, but because of the order in which I learned it, which matters, and because the naming of it changed the whole shape of the night from a thing we might solve before morning into a thing far older and far deeper, that had been waiting under the floor of the palace for longer than I had stood my post. I made Pell say it twice, to be sure I had heard, and he said it twice, and then he wept, the way a young man weeps who has understood at last that being a good son, and being a good man had been made, by a patient cruel hand, into opposite things, and that he had chosen the smaller good and lost the larger one and could not now have either. I did not comfort him. I could not. It was not mine to give, and he had not earned it, and giving it would have been a lie. But I did not despise him either. I marked him for what he was, a weak hand, not a wicked one, a hand that had been bought one kindness at a time by a man who collected weak hands the way a miser collects coin. And I marked, too, the man who had done the buying, and I felt the night settle into its true and dreadful proportions. Because if the name Pell had whispered was true, then the man on the wall and the carriage in the dark and the vapor case on the stone were not the plot. They were the last move of a plot, the visible tip of a thing that had been growing in the dark of the household for a year and more, a thing patient enough to spend months buying a footman, careful enough to forge a hand and learn a captain's name, cold enough to plan the quiet theft of 2 sleeping children from under the floor of a dancing palace. And the man who had grown it was not a stranger we could hunt through the gardens. He was a man who would be standing at this very moment, somewhere in the breaking crowd of the levee, in the warm light with a glass in his hand, watching the great staircase, waiting for word that the thing was done. I got Pell up off the floor. I did not bind him. There are men you bind and men you do not, and a drowning boy who has just handed you the whole plot is a man you do not. But I kept my hand on his shoulder firm, the grip that says you are mine now, and I walked him back up the dark wing to the gallery, and I gave him to Captain Vale, and I told the captain the name. I watched it land on him. Captain Vale had thought of everything, all his long career. He had imagined every bad night the household could have, and built a wall for each. But I do not think he had ever let himself imagine this particular bad night, the one where the rot is not at the gate but at the high table, and I watched the imagining of it cost him something, there in the gray hour, in a way the man on the wall had not. You are certain, he said. It was not really a question. The boy is certain, I said, and the boy has no reason to lie himself into a deeper grave. He named the man who owns him, Captain. Now we have to decide what we do with a name that big before the morning, and before the man it belongs to learns his hand has failed. The name was Lord Haldrick Mowbray, the Lord Chamberlain of Harrowgate Palace. I had better tell you what that meant, because to anyone outside the household the title is only a title, and you cannot feel the weight of it without knowing what the man inside it held. The Lord Chamberlain was the master of the whole upper house. Every appointment to the household was his to make or break. Every key in the palace answered by a chain of stewards and footmen and pages, ultimately to his hand. Every visitor to the family passed, somewhere along the line, through a door he controlled. He had served the crown for 30 years. He had served the Queen's father before her. He was trusted as the floor is trusted, as the walls are trusted, which is to say, completely and without thought, because the whole house was built on him, and no one builds a house and then wonders each morning whether the floor will hold. He stood at every state occasion, 3 paces from the Queen. He had stood, I had seen it with my own eyes, with his hand resting fondly on Prince Joran's shoulder at the Midsummer Review, smiling his dry kind smile, the very picture of the old and faithful servant who loved the children of the house as his own. And he had spent a year buying a footman one kindness at a time, so that two of those children could be lifted, asleep, out a window in the dark, while the house danced. I have turned it over 1,000 times in the long nights since, the why of it, and I will give you what we learned, though the learning came in pieces over many days. Lord Mowbray was not poor. He had no debts to flee. Lord Mowbray was not mad. He was, to the last, the most reasonable man in any room. The root of it, when we finally dug down to it, was the oldest and coldest root there is. The Queen reigned and reigned well and was loved, and a queen who is loved and reigns well cannot easily be moved, and a Lord Chamberlain, however high, is a servant and not a master, and there are men for whom 30 years of being the highest servant in the house curdles, somewhere in the dark of them, into a hunger to be served. There was a cousin of the blood, a man of the wider royal house, ambitious and pliable and deep in Mowbray's debt, who would, if the Queen's own children were gone and the Queen herself broken by their going, stand suddenly very near the throne, and who would owe the standing, there to the man who had cleared the way. Mowbray did not want a crown for himself. He wanted what is worse and quieter and more patient than wanting a crown. He wanted to be the hand inside the glove of a crown, forever, the unseen master of a master he had made. And 2 sleeping children were the only thing between him and that. He had not meant to harm them. I want that understood, not to soften him, there is no softening him, but because it is the truest and most chilling thing about him, and the thing that taught me most about how evil actually works in a great house. In Mowbray's own mind, I am sure, to the very end, he was not a man who would harm a child. The vapor case put them to sleep. It did not hurt them. The carriage would have carried them, sleeping, to a quiet house in the country where they would have been kept, comfortably, he would have said, kindly, until the using of them was done. He had built the whole monstrous thing so that he never had to think the word harm, so that every single step of it could be told to himself as a kindness or a necessity or a regrettable but bloodless move in a long game. That is how the worst things are done by men who are not monsters, not in a red rage, but in a cold, long patience, each step small enough to swallow, the whole never once looked it squarely. The man on the stair had a good, honest face. So did the man who had sent him. The good, honest face is the uniform of the patient evil. I have never trusted one since. But all of that we learned later. In the gray hour in the gallery, all we had was the name. And the name was a problem of a kind that made the man on the wall and the carriage in the dark look simple. Because you do not, on the word of a frightened footman, at 1 in the morning, lay hands on the Lord Chamberlain of the realm. If we are wrong, Captain Vale said low, so the section would not hear, and we take Mowbray, we are finished. Every man of us, and the boy hangs, and it changes nothing. And if we are right and we are slow, he did not finish that either. None of us were finishing our sentences that night. The unfinished ends of them lay all over the gallery like the unsaid word over the vapor case. Then we are not slow, I said, and we are not wrong, and we make the man prove himself, his own self, before he knows we are watching. We have his hand on the wall and his hand on the floor downstairs. I meant the man on the stair and the footman, and we have the carriage he ordered to the Rose Court if it is there. A carriage Mowbray ordered, with Mowbray's man to drive it, waiting in the dark for 2 children who will never come. That is not a footman's word, Captain. That is a thing we can put our own hands on. Find me the carriage, and the carriage finds us the man. Captain Vale looked at me in the gray hour, and I think it was in that moment that he decided about me, decided the thing that would, in the days after, change the whole course of my life, though I did not know it then and would not have believed it. He said, "Take 4 men, quietly, the Rose Court. If the carriage is there, you do not spring it, you watch it, and you mark every face near it, and you send me word, and we take the whole arm at once, on my command, with the Crown's own warrant, so that no part of it slips. Can you do that, Ashby? Can you stand at a thing you want to break, and not break it until the right instant?" It was the question of my whole trade, asked to my face, and I had been answering it with my body every night for 3 years. "Captain," I said, "that is the only thing I know how to do." The Rose Court at the dead of a levee night is a strange country. By day it is the prettiest corner of Harrowgate, a small cobbled court below the children's gallery, walled in old climbing roses, with a single arched gate to the carriage road, and a row of stone urns along the palace wall. By night, and especially by the dying night of a levee, it becomes a place of held breath. The roses black against the stone, the cobbles wet with the river mist that comes up after midnight, the noise of the breaking party muffled to a far warm murmur beyond the arch, and the carriages on the gravel road coming and going like slow ships in fog. I took my 4 men down by the servants' stair and out the low scullery door, and we came into the Rose Court not as guards, but as 4 tired servants stepping out for air at the end of a long night, which is what we made ourselves look like, because the first rule of watching a thing is to look like a thing not worth watching. The carriage was there. It stood in the deepest shadow along the far wall, under the children's gallery. Under the very window, I realized with a cold turn of the stomach that a sleeping child could be lowered from a plain, dark traveling carriage with no arms on its door, 2 good horses standing patient in the mist, and a driver up on the box, motionless, his collar up and his hat down, waiting. There was a second man at the horses' heads, and a third I marked after a while, standing in the black of the gate arch where the carriage road came in, watching the road, a lookout. 3 men and a carriage in the Rose Court at 1:30, under the nursery window, on a night no honest carriage had any reason to wait there in the dark. It was exactly what I had told Vale it would be, and the being right of it gave me no satisfaction at all, only the cold, clean focus of a man who has found the thing he most feared to find. I did not spring it. That was the hardest hour of my life, harder than the seam of the heartbeat in the gallery, because in the gallery the not moving lasted a breath and here it lasted an hour, and every minute of it was a minute in which I knew exactly what those 3 patient men in the dark were waiting for, and stood 10 yards from them and let them go on waiting, and did not break, because breaking would have caught 3 men and let the man who sent them slip back into the warm light upstairs and become, again, the floor the whole house trusted. I put my 4 men, 2 and 2, into the shadow of the urns and the scullery door, and I sent one back inside with word to the captain. "The carriage is here, 3 men. Send the warrant." And then I waited and watched, and marked every face I could see in the dark, and held the whole live coiled one of me to end it on the shortest leash I had ever held it on. And in the waiting, because a man's mind will go where it goes when his body is forced to be still, I thought about why I was the man standing in that court and not some other. I had not always been a guard. I will tell it briefly, because I learned that night that the things in a man's past are not past at all. They are the tools he reaches for when the present finally asks the question his whole life has been the answer to. I had been a soldier first in the Eldermore line, in the hard country up along the northern marches, where the realm's quarrel with the hill clans was settled, year on year, in small ugly fights that no song was ever made of. I had been good at it, in the way I am good at standing still, not the loud charging kind of good, but the kind that holds the gap in the line when the loud men have run, the kind that does not fire too soon and does not fire too late. And there had been a night up there, I will not tell the whole of it, when I had held a doorway in a burning steading with my own body and a rifle and nothing else, between a clan raiding party and a cellar full of farm children whose fathers were away with the levee, and I had held it until the children could be got out the back, and the holding of it had cost me a thing I do not speak of, and given me a thing I have never lost, which was the certain knowledge, learned in fire, that there is no work in the world worth more than standing between the small and the dark, and no work I would ever again do gladly that was not, in some shape, that work. When the marches quieted, I had come south, and a colonel who had been at the steading and never forgot it had put my name forward for the King's Guard, and I had thought, when I took the post outside the nursery, that I was being put out to a quiet pasture, a ceremonial post, a standing still post, a post for a man whose hard years were behind him. I had thought in my low moments on the long quiet nights that I had become an ornament. A man in a red tunic and a tall bearskin who stood at a door so that the picture of the palace should be complete, and that nothing would ever again ask of me the thing the steading had asked. I had been a little ashamed of it, if I am honest, in the way a working man is ashamed of work that does not work him. I was not ashamed of it any more. Standing in the rose court in the mist, watching the carriage that would have carried 2 sleeping children out from under their dancing house, I understood that the quiet post and the burning doorway were the same post, that the 3 years of standing still had not been a pasture but a vigil, and that every dull, unthanked night of it had been the realm paying, in advance and without knowing it, for the 1 hour when the dark would come for the children of the house, and find at the door, not an ornament, but the man who had held the doorway in the fire. The runner came back from the captain. The warrant was coming, hold and watch and on the bell. And then the night, which had been holding its breath, let it out, and the whole shape of the thing changed under my hands, in the way the playbook of my old colonel used to warn. No plan survives the first true contact, and the moment you think you have measured a thing is the moment it grows a new edge. Because a figure came down into the rose court from the palace, not from the levee, not from the carriage road, but from inside, from a small private door in the palace wall that I had not been watching because I had not known it opened. And the figure crossed the wet cobbles to the carriage with the unhurried certainty of a man who owns the ground he walks on, and spoke a low word to the driver, and the driver leaned down to him, and the mist parted for just a moment around the carriage lamp. And I saw the figure's face. It was Lord Mowbray himself. He had not stayed in the warm light upstairs with a glass in his hand, as I had been so sure he would, waiting for word. He had come down himself into the dark to the carriage, to see the thing done with his own eyes, and that changed everything, because a Lord Chamberlain who can be explained away as the distant master of a footman's crime cannot be explained away when he is standing in the rose court at 1:30 in the morning, with his own hand on the door of the carriage meant to carry the children. He had, by coming down, done the one thing that made him provable. And he had also, by coming down, put himself within 10 yards of me in the dark, the patient cold master of the whole long plot, with the children 1 floor above and a carriage at his hand. And every one in my body rose up at once and said, now, take him now while you can see his face on the door, and I held it. I held it on the shortest leash of all, because the warrant was not yet here, and the lookout was still in the arch, and the driver still on the box, and if I took Mowbray a heartbeat too soon before the captain and the warrant and the witnesses, then it would be my word, a guard's word, against the floor the whole house trusted, and the floor would hold and I would fall. So I waited, with the master of the dark 10 yards away in the mist, for the bell. I have never in my life wanted anything as much as I wanted, in that hour, to not wait. And the not waiting was the whole of the work, and the whole of the honor, and the only thing standing between 2 sleeping children and a country house in the dark. But the night was not done changing its shape, and the thing it did next was the cruelest test of the whole hour, because it was not a danger. It was a temptation that wore the face of relief. Lord Mowbray at the carriage door grew impatient. I could see it in him even at 10 yards in the mist, the small stiffening of a man whose plan is running past its time, who has waited for word from the gallery that has not come, who is beginning, in the cold animal part of him that no good honest face can govern, to suspect. He spoke again to the driver, sharper now. He looked up once at the dark window of the children's gallery above him, the window the child was to have been lowered from, and the window stayed dark and silent, and I watched the suspicion grow in him like frost on glass. He took a step back from the carriage. He looked toward the small private door in the wall by which he had come. He was, I understood with a lurch, about to leave to abandon the carriage and the 3 men and the whole night, to walk back through his private door into the warm light and become, again and forever, the floor the house trusted, a Lord Chamberlain who had merely stepped down for air and could prove, by 100 witnesses, that he had been upstairs at the levee all the long evening. If he reached that door, we lost him. The man on the wall would hang, and the footman would hang, and Mowbray would mourn beautifully at the funeral he had planned and never once be touched, and would try again, in a year, in 5 years, with a new footman and a new patient kindness, because a man like that does not stop, he only waits. And here was the temptation, and it was a clever one, and it came up in me dressed as duty. Take him now. The warrant is not here, but he is leaving, and a thing leaving is a thing lost, and surely it is better to spring too soon and hold the man than to keep the rule and let him walk. Surely the rule is for ordinary nights, and this is not an ordinary night. Surely the children matter more than the form. Every reasonable voice in me said it, and it was all true, and it was all wrong, and the wrongness of it was the deepest thing I learned in the whole long night. Because if I sprang on the Lord Chamberlain in the Rose Court on my own word, with no warrant and no senior officer, and no witness but 4 guards who answered to me, then in the cold light of the morning it would not be a guard taking a traitor. It would be a guard laying violent hands on the most senior servant of the crown, in the dark, on the say-so of a frightened footman, with not one thing proved. And the house, which trusted Mowbray as it trusted the floor, would believe what it had always believed, and the carriage would be explained, and the men would scatter, and the only one who would surely fall would be me. And with me would fall the warrant Captain Vale was even then carrying down through the dark to make it all unbreakable. The reasonable but wrong middle road, spring early, hold the man, sort out the rest after, was the exact road that lost everything. The hard road, the unbearable road, was to let him walk to the very threshold of his private door, and trust the bell and trust the captain and hold. So I made the only move the leash allowed, which was not to break the leash but to lengthen the watch. I sent my fastest man, low along the wall behind the urns, to the private door, not to seize Mowbray, but to be there, a quiet shape in the dark between the Lord Chamberlain and his escape, so that if he reached the door he would find it was not the empty road back to the warm light he thought it was. And I prayed, I am not ashamed to say I prayed, there in the mist, that the bell would ring before Mowbray reached the door, so that the law and the witness and the warrant would all arrive together in the one instant, and the whole arm would be taken at once, and no part of it would slip. I want to say a true thing here about fear, because the songs never do, and a young guard reading this someday deserves better than the songs. I was afraid in the Rose Court. Not the loud, bright fear that makes a man act. That kind is almost easy. It spends itself in motion. But the other kind, the slow, cold, patient fear that comes when a man must hold still and do nothing while everything he loves is in the balance, and cannot spend itself, and only sits in the chest like swallowed ice. That is the fear that a guard's whole training is built to govern. And it is governed not by feeling it less, but by refusing to let it choose for you. I felt every ounce of it, there behind the urns, with the carriage 10 yards off and the children 1 floor up, and the Lord Chamberlain's hand drifting toward the door that would lose him. I felt the want to bolt the whole thing into motion, just to be rid of the unbearable stillness. And I did the only thing 3 years of a quiet door and a lifetime before it had made me able to do. I let the fear be there and did not obey it, and kept my eyes on the one true mark, the children, only ever the children, and held. There is a thing my old colonel of the marches used to say, on the bad cold nights before the worst of the fights, when the young men's hands shook and they were ashamed of it. Courage, he said, is not the absence of fear. A man with no fear is only a man with no sense, and I would not have him in my line. Courage is fear that has been given its orders, the shaking hand that loads the rifle anyway, the cold chest that holds the post anyway. I had thought it a fine saying when I was young and not yet truly tested, the way young men think sayings are the thing itself. I did not understand it until the Rose Court, where I learned, at last into the bone, that the bravest thing a man ever does is usually nothing at all, is the not running, the not striking, the not breaking, the holding of a terrible stillness one heartbeat longer than he believes he can, and that no one ever sees it, and no song is ever made of it, because from the outside it looks exactly like a man standing quietly in the dark, doing nothing. That is the secret heart of my whole trade, and I will set it down plainly for whoever stands a quiet door after me. The great deeds of a guard are invisible by their nature, because the deed is the disaster that does not happen, and you cannot point to a thing that did not happen, and the world only ever counts what it can point to. So we are thought ornaments, so we are thought to do nothing, and the nothing we do, the patient, disciplined, terrified, unwitnessed nothing, is the wall the whole house sleeps behind and never sees. I made my peace with that long ago. A guard who needs to be seen has mistaken his trade for a stage, and a man on a stage will, sooner or later, on the one night it matters, do the seen thing instead of the right thing. I had decided, years before the Rose Court, that I would rather do the right thing in the dark, unseen, than the grand thing in the light, and be the kind of man the children could sleep behind. The Rose Court was where that old decision came due, and I paid it, and I would pay it again. Mowbray took a step toward the private door. My man was not yet in place behind it. And the bell did not ring. I have lived a long life since that night, and I do not think I have ever again held so much, for so long, on so short a leash. As I held in the 3 steps Lord Mowbray took toward that door with the bell silent and my man not yet set. Every step was a year. Every step was the children. And I did not break, because breaking was the losing, and the only winning was to hold the unbearable middle of the moment exactly as long as it had to be held and not one heartbeat longer, which is, I have come to believe, the whole of what honor is when you strip away the songs and the ribbons. Honor is not the grand thing you do. Honor is the thing you refuse to do too soon. Mowbray reached the private door. He put his hand on it. And the bell rang. It rang from the gallery above and from the gatehouse and from the deep tower all at once. The long climbing peal again, the children, come, and the Rose Court came apart into motion in a single breath. Captain Vale came through the arch from the carriage road with 8 men, and the Crown's own warrant in his hand, and a magistrate of the household at his shoulder to witness it. And at the same instant my 4 men rose out of the shadow of the urns, and my fastest man, who had reached the private door in the breath after Mowbray's hand touched it, set his shoulder to it and his body in the gap, so that the Lord Chamberlain's rode back to the warm light closed in his face like a trap. The 3 men at the carriage broke for the arch and ran straight into Captain Vale's 8, and there was a short, ugly, conclusive scuffle that I will not dress up. They were taken, all 3, the driver and the man at the horses and the lookout, taken and held and disarmed, and the horses, frightened, stamped and blew in the mist, and were quieted. And the carriage that had waited so long and so patiently under the children's window for a cargo that would never come stood empty and revealed in the lamplight. An ordinary dark traveling carriage that was, I have always thought since, the most terrible object I have ever seen, precisely because it was so ordinary, and had been meant for so monstrous a use, and had so nearly been put to it. And Lord Mowbray, the master of the whole patient dark, turned from the door my man had shut in his face and stood, in the lamplight of the Rose Court, with the warrant being read aloud to him by a magistrate's clerk in a voice that shook. And he did not break, and he did not run, and he did not weep as the footman had wept. He drew himself up, a tall man, an old man, an immaculate man even at 1:30 in the morning, and he composed his good honest face into something I had never seen on it and have hoped never to see again. A serene, untroubled, almost gentle contempt, the face of a man who has been caught and has decided in the same instant that being caught is merely a thing that has happened to lesser men's plans and not a thing that has happened to him. "This is a grievous error," he said in his dry, kind voice to Captain Vale, as though he were correcting a footman who had brought up the wrong wine. I came down for air. I heard a disturbance. You will all of you regret the wildness of this night by morning. And then his pale eyes found me, the guard who had stood at the door, the one undistinguished man in a red tunic who had upset 30 years of patience by knowing a tread on a stair. And he looked at me for a long moment with that gentle contempt, and he said only to me, very softly, "You have made a mistake, guardsman, about which way the floor of this house tilts. There are a great many people who will be very sorry by Michaelmas that you did not simply take a paper and step aside. I will remember your face." I said nothing. A guard learns that there is a silence that answers a threat more completely than any word, and I gave him that silence, and held his pale gaze with my eyes forward and my own face still, and let him learn, in the long unanswered moment, that the floor of the house did not tilt toward him here, at this door, with these children, and that one quiet man could stand where the whole patient weight of the high table pressed and not move. He was the first to look away. And here is where I must be honest about the false dawn, because the night was not, in fact, one when the warrant was read and the men were taken, and Mowbray's contempt looked away from me in the Rose Court. It only seemed one, and the seeming was the most dangerous part of all. By the grey of true dawn, Lord Mowbray was held in his own apartments under guard, for you do not throw the Lord Chamberlain of the realm into a cell on the strength of a night, even a night like that one, and the men of the carriage were in the gatehouse, and the man from the stair was held, and the footman Pell was held, and the whole arm seemed accounted for, and the children were asleep safe in the Queen's apartments with Briarwind barring the door, and I came off my long night thinking, in my bones, it is done. We held the door, the children are safe, it is done. It was not done. Because by midday, when the household woke into its ordinary murmuring life, the floor of the house began, exactly as Mowbray had promised, to tilt. The story that ran through the corridors by noon was not the true story. The true story was held close by the captain and the magistrate and the few of us who had been in the Rose Court. The story that ran was a different one, a soft and reasonable one, and I have never been able to learn for certain who first set it walking, though I have my suspicion, and my suspicion wears a good honest face. The story that ran was this, that there had been a sad confusion in the night, that a loyal and tireless Lord Chamberlain, hearing a disturbance near the children, had gone himself to see them safe, that an overzealous guardsman, new to his post and made wild by the long levee, had laid hands on senior servants of the crown on the strength of a hysterical footman's lie, that the footman, a known petty thief desperate over his debts, had named his betters to save his own neck, and that the whole sorry business was a guard's blunder dressed up as a plot, and would be quietly set right, and the good old Lord Chamberlain owed a great apology, which a gracious house would of course extend. It was a very good story. It was a forgery of a night, the way the night pass had been a forgery of a hand, good enough to pass by lamplight to a tired house that wanted, more than anything, to believe that its floor still held. And it was winning. By the afternoon I could feel it winning in the way the household looked at me, the small sidelong glances, the doors that did not quite open as I passed, the murmur that stopped when I came near. The man who had stood the door was becoming, by noon of the next day, the man who had made the wild mistake. And I understood that the door I had held in the dark of the gallery was a door I would have to hold all over again, in the light, in the open, against a far more patient enemy than a man with a vapor case, against a comfortable lie that a frightened house desperately wanted to be true. There was only one person in the whole of Harrowgate who could close that door for good. And by a turn I had not planned and could not have planned, she was about to learn the truth of the night, not from the soft, reasonable story that was winning the corridors, and not from a careful report read to her across a council table, but from the worst and rawest and most unanswerable source there is, from the boy's own broken mouth, in the cold gray hour, when she came, unannounced and alone, to a place she was never meant to be. It happened on the second night. Captain Vale had taken Pell, the footman, out of the gatehouse and put him in a small plain room off the guardroom in the east wing, not a cell, but not free either, because the boy was the keystone of the whole true story, and the soft false story had already begun to call him a liar, and the captain wanted him kept safe and whole and able to speak, so that when the matter came before the Queen's own justice, his telling could not be said to have been beaten out of him or bought. I had the watch on that room. I had asked for it. I will not pretend I had no other reason than duty. The boy had asked after the children before he had asked after himself, and a man who does that, whatever else he has done, is a man I would rather guard than guard against. It was past 1 in the morning, the same dead hour at which the whole thing had begun, and the east wing was quiet, and I was at my post by the door of the plain room, and inside the boy could not sleep. I could hear him through the door, not weeping now, but talking low, the broken muttering of a young man going over and over the road that had brought him there, the kindness that had been a hook, the months, the keys, the night. He talked to himself the way the guilty talk in the dark, as if saying it might make it untrue, and I let him talk, because the talking did him no harm, and the silence would have done him worse. And then, in the muffled quiet of the wing, I heard a footstep on the gallery that I did not know. I came to attention before I had even thought why, 3 years of the gallery's ledger speaking through my body, and then I saw her, and the why was the most astonishing thing of the whole astonishing night. It was the Queen. She had come alone, which a queen never does, and she had come in a plain dark robe with her hair loose, with no chamberlain, no lady, no guard but the one she had passed on her way and ordered, I learned after, to let her go on and say nothing, Queen Saraland, the reigning queen of Eldermore in the dead of the second night, walking the east wing herself because she could not sleep, because 2 days of the soft reasonable story and the council's careful murmurs had left her, the mother of the children, knowing less of the true shape of the danger than the lowest scullery footman knew, and she had reached the end of her endurance of not knowing, and had got up out of her bed and come, herself, alone, to the room where the boy was held, to hear it from the one mouth that could not be a courtier's polished version of it. I stepped from the wall and bowed and began, low, to tell her she should not be here, that I would fetch the captain, that this was no place, and she lifted one hand just slightly and stopped me, and I saw her face in the single lamp, and I have served the crown a long life, and I have never seen anything in it that I will carry to my grave more surely than I will carry the Queen's face in that lamplight. It was not a regal face. It was not the face from the coins. It was a mother's face, stripped of everything but the one question, gray with 2 nights of not knowing, and she looked at me and she said, very low, "Is that the boy, the footman, the one they say is a liar?" "It is, ma'am," I said. "And he is not a liar." "I want to hear him," she said. "Not a report, not the captain, not the council, him, as he is, with no one shaping it for me. I have been told 100 careful things in 2 days, and I do not believe one of them, and I will go on not sleeping until I have heard the one thing no one will let me hear, which is what truly happened over the heads of my sleeping children. Let me stand here. He will not know I am here, and I will hear it as it is." I should not have allowed it. By every protocol I should have fetched the captain and had her conducted back to her apartments. But there is a higher law than protocol, and I had spent the whole of that night learning where it lay, and I knew, looking at the mother's face in the lamp, that the higher law that night was that this woman had the right to know what had nearly been done to her children, in the plain words of the one who had nearly done it, with no one standing between her and the truth, and that the soft false story winning the corridors would never be beaten by a careful report, but might, just might, be beaten forever by a mother hearing the real thing in the dark with her own ears. So I did the thing I had done all night. I stood at the door, and I did not move, and I let the moment be exactly what it was. I opened the door a hand's width, no more, so that the boy, in his low, broken muttering, would not see the gap or know that anyone stood beyond it, and I stepped back, and I let the Queen of Eldermore stand in the dark of the gallery, hidden, and listen to the footman talk. And the boy, who did not know that the mother of the children he had so nearly handed to the dark stood 3 feet away in the shadow, went on with his low confession to the empty room, And what he said, in the artless, unguarded, devastating plainness of a man talking to himself in the dark, was the whole of it. The kindness that had been the hook, the dying mother, the keys, the months of small things, the vapor case and what it was for, and how he had not let himself think the word for what it was for until the guard had said it on the stair, the window above the rose court, the carriage, and then, lowest of all, the thing that I think broke the queen where no report ever could have, the thing the boy said into the dark not knowing she heard. I held the little prince's pony once in the yard while he mounted. Last spring, he thanked me. He's a kind one, the prince, he thanks the servants, not all of them do, and I held his pony and he thanked me and I took the gentleman's money the same week, and I never once let myself put the two of them in the same thought, the boy thanking me and what the money was for, because if I'd put them in the same thought I couldn't have gone on. So I kept them apart. I'm good at keeping things apart. That's the worst of me. I held his pony and I thanked God when the guard stopped it. I did. I thanked God on the floor when the guard said they were safe, because some part of me had been praying the whole year that someone would stop me, because I couldn't stop myself. And he could not go on, and the room was silent except for his ragged breathing, and the gallery was silent except for one other sound, very soft, that I will hear until I die. The sound of the Queen of Eldermore, standing hidden in the dark, hearing how near she had come to losing her children to a quiet that would have woken into the loudest grief the realm had ever known, and being, for one long moment, utterly unable to make a sound at all. She did not weep. I want that recorded because it would be easy and false to say she wept. She did not. It was worse than weeping. She stood frozen, one hand against the cold stone of the gallery wall, her face white and still in the lamplight, her eyes open and fixed on nothing, like a woman who has been walking on a floor all her life, and has only this instant been shown, in plain words, the depth of the pit that was always 1 inch beneath it. That had been 1 inch beneath it on every ordinary morning she had kissed her children and sent them to their lessons. 1 inch beneath it through 30 years of trusting the floor of her own house, 1 inch beneath it while she danced at her own levee, and her Lord Chamberlain smiled his dry, kind smile 3 paces from her. She stood frozen in the gratitude that is too large to move inside of, the gratitude that is not relief, but terror seen at last from the far safe side, terror understood in full, the gratitude of a mother who has just learned exactly how close the dark came to her children, and exactly how narrow the thing was that turned it. She stood like that for a long time. I did not move. I had stood still all night so that the children could sleep. I stood still now so that the mother could feel the whole weight of what had nearly been, and find her own feet again under it, in her own time, with no one watching but the one man who had held the door. When she moved at last, it was to reach out without looking and close the door gently, all the way, so that the boy inside should not be shamed by knowing he had been overheard, which was a kindness I have never forgotten. The reigning queen's first act on learning the worst thing she had ever learned being to spare a little dignity to the broken footman who had nearly undone her. Then she turned to me, and her face had changed. It was still white, still stripped, but it was no longer frozen. The gratitude had moved through her and come out the other side as something with iron in it, and I understood that I was looking at the moment when a grieving mother becomes, again, a reigning queen, not by putting the mother away, but by taking the mother with her into the throne. "You are the guard," she said. Her voice was very low and very steady, the steadiness that costs more than shaking wood. "The one on the stair, the one they are calling in my own corridors, a wild and overzealous man who laid hands on his betters." She said the words betters with a quiet that could have frozen the river. "What is your name, guardsman?" "Corwin Ashby, ma'am." "Corwin Ashby." She said it the way Briarwin had said it, the night of the stair, as if setting it somewhere it would not be lost. "2 days, Mr. Ashby. My whole house has been at gentle, reasonable, well-meaning work to persuade me that what happened over the heads of my sleeping children was a confusion, a footman's lie, a guard's blunder. Wise men have sat across tables from me, and used the word unfortunate. And I, God forgive me, was beginning to let them soothe me, because a mother wants, more than she wants air, to believe that the floor of her house held. You have just let me hear, from the only mouth that cannot lie about it, exactly how it did not hold, and exactly who it was that drilled the hole, and exactly how near my children came to going out a window into the dark while I danced one floor below. She stopped. Her hand was steady now on the stone. And you let me hear it not by telling me, which I would have doubted, but by standing aside and letting the truth speak itself in front of me. That is a rarer kind of honesty than I am used to in this house, Mr. Ashby. Most men, given the Queen alone in a gallery at 1 in the morning, would have used the hour to make themselves large in my eyes. You used it to make the truth large and yourself nothing at all. I will not forget which kind of man that makes you. I said the only thing there was to say. I stood my post, ma'am. That is all I did. Any guard worth his tunic would have done the same. And she looked at me with something that was almost, in the gray hour, a smile, though there was no joy anywhere near it. No, Mr. Ashby, she said. That is the lie the brave tell to keep from being thanked. Any guard worth his tunic would have hoped to do the same. Most, on a levee night, tired at the bad end of a long watch, handed a paper by a man with a chain and a good face, would have glanced at the paper and stepped aside, and told themselves afterward that there was no way to have known. You did not glance. You did not step aside. You knew a tread on a stair from 3 years of caring about a corridor that no one ever thanked you for caring about. The difference between would have and did is the whole width of my children's lives, and you stood in it. Do not tell me it was nothing. I have just learned tonight exactly what it was. Then she gathered her plain robe about her, and she stood up out of the mother, and into the Queen the way I have seen a soldier stand up out of a wound and into the line, and she said, in a different voice, a voice I had not yet heard from her, the voice that I think her own Lord Chamberlain had spent 30 years forgetting she possessed. Walk me to the captain, Mr. Ashby. The reasonable, soothing work of my house ends tonight. I have heard the truth with my own ears in the dark, and now the whole of Harrowgate is going to hear it with theirs in the light, and there is going to be nothing gentle about it at all. What followed, in the days after, I will tell you quickly, because the heart of the night was the gallery and the stair and the rose court, and a story should not outlast its own heart. But the threads must be tied, and the Queen tied every one of them, and I have never in my life seen a wrong answered more completely or more justly than Queen Saralind answered this one. She did not have Lord Mowbray dragged from his apartments in the dark. That was not her way, and it would have given the soft false story its last weapon, the wronged old servant, taken cruelly in the night. Instead she did the colder and surer thing. She summoned, for the next noon, a full and open council of the realm's high houses and high officers, in the great long gallery where the levee had been held, the same room, in the same light, with the same people who had danced there while the carriage waited below, and she had Lord Mowbray brought to it in his full chain of office, with every honor as the Lord Chamberlain he still, by the letter, was. And the corridors murmured that this was the hour the wild night would be set right, the guard's blunder undone, the old servant restored, and Mowbray, I am told, walked into that gallery wearing his serene, untroubled contempt like his chain, certain the floor still tilted his way. And then the Queen, in front of the whole assembled height of the realm, called the witnesses. She called the Lady Briarwin, who told, in her dry, exact, unhurried voice, of the night pass that was a forgery and the wax that gave it away. She called Captain Vale, who told of the carriage in the Rose Court and the warrant and the 3 men taken. She called the man who had come up the stair, who, faced with the open council and the warrant and the certainty of his own fall, and offered the one mercy of a lighter accounting for a full truth, gave the full truth, and named the hand that had sent him, and it was the same hand the footman had named. And then last, when the gallery was already very quiet, she called the footman Pell not as a criminal in chains, but plainly to speak. And the boy, who had spent 2 days being called a liar by the soft story, stood in front of the whole realm and told it exactly as he had told it to the empty room in the dark. The kindness that was a hook and the dying mother and the keys and the window, and the thing he had thanked God the guard had stopped. And there was not a soul in that gallery, by the end, who could look at the boy's broken, plain, honest grief and believe he had invented one word of it. And Lord Mowbray's serene contempt held, I watched it hold, that good honest face holding its composure against the whole rising weight of the truth, until the Queen did the one thing he had not prepared for, the thing that broke him as surely as my forearm had broken the man on the stair against the gallery wall. She did not accuse him, she let him accuse himself. She had, it transpired, in the 2 quiet days while the corridors murmured, set Captain Vale and the magistrate to the patient, unglamorous work that clever plotters never imagine, the tracing of the carriage's hire, the questioning of the country house that had been made ready, the finding of the apothecary who had filled the vapor case and the steward's chain that had been made, the small, dull, careful following of every thread back to the one hand that had paid for all of it. And she laid it all out in order, dull link by dull link, in front of the council, not as an accusation, but as a chain of plain facts, each one nothing on its own, each one provable, the whole of them together a thing that no serene contempt and no good honest face and no soft reasonable story could stand against. It was the wax again in the end. It was always the wax. The clever men imagine the bold strokes. They are undone by the careful keeping of small true things, by the ledger an old woman keeps in her head of which wax she used in which month, by a guard who keeps the ledger of a corridor's treads, by a queen who keeps, where it cannot be reached, the records of who hired what carriage in the dark. When it was done, when the last dull link was laid down and the whole chain lay shining and unbreakable in the light of the long gallery, Lord Mowbray's good honest face did, at last, the only honest thing I ever saw it do. It broke. The serene contempt fell off it like a mask coming loose, and underneath was a small, cold, frightened old man who had spent 30 years being the floor of a house, and had, in his hunger to be the master of it, drilled a hole beneath 2 sleeping children, and who saw in that moment in front of the whole realm that the floor had held against him, and that the holding had been done by the least of the men he despised, a guard at a door, and an old governess with her wax, and a frightened footman who loved a dying mother, and a queen he had thought too gentle to be feared. He had no words. For the first time in 30 years, the Lord Chamberlain of the realm had nothing to say at all. The Queen stripped him of his chain of office there in the long gallery with her own hands, a thing not done in living memory, and gave him to the Crown's justice. And the justice of Eldermore, which is slow and sure, did the rest in its own time, and he ended his days far from any court, a forgotten man in a plain room, which is, I have always thought, the exact and perfect opposite of the thing he most wanted, which was to be the unseen master at the center of everything. He got to be unseen. He did not get to be the master. The realm forgot his name on purpose, and I will honor that here in the only way left to me, by giving it no more lines than it has already had. The cousin of the blood, the ambitious, pliable man who would have stood near the throne if the children were gone, was a harder thread, and the Queen pulled it with a cooler hand than I would have thought she had in her. He had been careful. Mowbray had kept him at a distance, the way a careful poisoner keeps the cup at a distance from his own lips, and there was not proof enough to put him before the justice. So the Queen did not try. She did the thing that, in a great house, is worse than the cell and surer than the rope. She let him understand, in one quiet private audience from which he came out gray, that she knew exactly what he had been content to inherit, and exactly what he had been content not to ask too closely about, and that he would spend the rest of his life at the farthest edge of the court she could send him to without a trial, holding no office, trusted with no key, near no child, watched, gently, courteously, completely, until he died. He took himself off to a cold estate in the North Marches and was never seen at Harrowgate again, and I have always thought that the Queen, in that one audience, did to him with her eyes and her certainty exactly what I had done to the man on the stair with my forearm in the wall. She held him without striking him, in a grip he could not break, and let him feel the whole weight of a power that never once had to raise its hand. Restraint, I have come to believe, is not the weak cousin of force. It is force that has grown up. It is the strongest thing in any room, when the man or the woman who holds it knows precisely how much of it to let out and when, and the discipline to let out not 1 ounce more. Then there was the boy. I had wondered, through the whole of the open council, what the Queen would do with Pell, the weak hand, the bought hand, the hand that had given the plot its keys and its hours and its window, and that had also, on the floor of the muniment passage, thanked God when the guard stopped it. By every letter of the law he was a traitor, and traitors do not end well, and I will not pretend the law was wrong to name him one. But the law is the floor, and a queen who reigns well stands on the floor and is not herself the floor. She is the one who decides, in the rare terrible cases, where the floor's plain measure must give way to something truer. And Queen Saralind had heard, in the dark of the gallery, the thing the council had only been told, had heard the boy's unguarded voice say that some part of me had been praying the whole year that someone would stop me, and a queen who has heard that in the dark with her own ears cannot unhear it. She did not free him. To free him would have made the floor a lie, and she would not do that even for mercy. But she did not give him to the rope either. She gave him, instead, the one sentence I have never heard a court give before or since, and it was the most royal thing I ever watched her do. She sent him to the prison hospice on the coast where the crown keeps the condemned who are also the sick and the dying. And she sent his dying mother there with him, at the crown's own cost, to the good physicians and the soft beds the boy had sold his soul to be unable to afford, so that the mother whose dying had been made the hook of the whole monstrous plot would not, at least, die alone in a poor house at the wrong end of the city. And she set the boy to serve her there in that hospice for the rest of his natural life, washing and lifting and sitting up through the bad nights of the other dying poor, to spend, the Queen said, the years you would have given to a wickedness in the giving of comfort instead, since it appears, Master Pell, that you are a man who can be bought. And I am minded to buy you for something better than he did. The boy wept when he heard it, and I do not blame him. It was justice and mercy braided so tight together that no one in the gallery could have pulled them apart, which is, I think, the rarest and highest kind of justice there is, and the kind that only a ruler who has herself stood 1 inch from the pit can find. His mother lived another year in a soft bed with her son's hand to hold. I had it from the hospice later. I count it quietly among the things saved that night, though it is not the thing the songs remember. And then at the last there was me. I had not thought about myself at all, through any of it, which is the truth and not a modesty. A man at his post does not think about himself, and I had been at my post, in one form or another, from the moment the strange tread came up the east stair. But the Queen had thought about me, and on the 3rd day she sent for me, and I stood before her in the small audience room with the council gone and only Captain Vale and the Lady Briarwyn by the wall, and I did not know what was coming, and I will tell you honestly that I half expected, in the soldier's way, to be quietly moved on, for a guard who has been at the white-hot center of a thing that shook the high table is an awkward man to keep at a quiet door. And great houses often deal with their awkward heroes by thanking them and posting them somewhere far and dull. That is not what she did. "Mr. Ashby," the Queen said, "I find I am in a difficulty, and you are the cause of it, and I mean to lay it at your feet and let you see me solve it, because you of all men have earned the right not to be solved behind a closed door." She had her composure fully back now. The frozen mother of the gallery was gone, folded away inside the reigning Queen, but I could see, I will always be able to see, that the Queen now standing there had been built in part on the 3rd night, out of what the mother had heard in the dark. The difficulty is this. I owe you a debt I cannot pay, because the thing you saved cannot be priced. You cannot put a sum on 2 sleeping children, and you cannot give a man back a thing he refused, with his whole life and trade, to let be taken. And yet a debt that is not paid at all is a dishonor in the one who owes it, and I will not carry that dishonor, even to you, even when the paying is impossible. So I have decided to do the only honest thing a sovereign can do with an unpayable debt, which is not to pretend to pay it, but to honor it in the open forever, where the whole realm can see that the crown knows what it owes and to whom. And she did 3 things there that I will set down plainly, because they are the resolution of my whole life, and not only of that night. The first, she did not move me from the nursery door. I had feared she would. Instead, she made the post itself an honor. She named the watch outside the royal nursery the Queen's own watch, to be held thereafter by the most trusted guards of the household and by no others, and she set its first captaincy on me, so that the quiet, unthanked door I had stood at for 3 years as an ornament became, by her word, the most honored post a guard of Harrowgate could hold. And I held it and trained the men who would hold it after me for the rest of my service, and I never wanted any other post, and she knew when she gave it me that I never would. The second, she had the soft false story killed in the open, by her own mouth, so completely that it could never crawl back into the corridors. She told the whole household assembled the true tale, not my name made large, for I had asked her, and she had agreed, that the telling stay on the truth and not on the man, but the true shape of the night, the forged pass, the wax, the carriage, the door held, so that every sidelong glance and every door that had not opened as I passed turned in a single afternoon into something else entirely. And I will not pretend that the something else was not sweet, after 2 days of being the man who made the wild mistake, though a guard learns to want the truth told more than he wants the credit, and I had learned it better than most that week. And the third was the thing I carry. When the audience was done and I had bowed and turned to go, the Queen said my name once more, and I stopped, and she came down from where she stood, the reigning Queen of Eldermore, and crossed the small room to me. And she did a thing that no protocol in the realm has a line for, a thing the Lady Briarwyn told me afterward she had never seen a sovereign of Harrowgate do to any servant in 40 years of service. She took my right hand, the hand that had turned the man's wrist on the stair, the hand that had held the leash all night and not let it slip, in both of her own, and she held it, and she did not speak for a moment, and when she did her voice was not the Queen's voice at all but the one I had heard in the dark of the gallery, the mother's. "My children will grow up," she said, "and grow old, and they will never know there was a night when the dark came up the east stair for them, because you made certain they would never know. You traded their gratitude for their safety and asked nothing back, which is the bargain your whole trade is built on, and the loneliest bargain there is. So they will never thank you, Mr. Ashby. They cannot. They will not know there is anything to thank you for. And that is exactly as it should be, and it is also a thing I will not allow to stand wholly unanswered, because I know, even if they never will. So let me do for them the thing they cannot do for themselves." And she lifted my hand, the rough hand of a guard in both of hers, and she pressed it once briefly against her brow, the Queen of Eldermore, bowing her head over the hand of a sentry, and she said, very low, "Thank you. On behalf of 2 children who will sleep tonight not knowing they were ever in danger, and on behalf of the woman who would not have survived their loss. Thank you, Corwin Ashby. For the rest of my life, every time I kiss them good night, I will be thanking you, and they will think their mother is only being tender, and they will never know why their mother holds them a moment longer than the other mothers do. That is the thank you I can give you. It is the only one that is true." I did not trust myself to speak. A guard learns to hold his face still through a great deal, and I held it then, but I will tell you, who are not the Queen and not the children and so may know it, that holding it was the hardest stillness of the whole long story. Harder than the seam of the heartbeat on the stair, harder than the hour in the rose court, and that when I had bowed and gone out and stood once more in the corridor with the door closing behind me, I let out at last the breath I think I had been holding since the strange tread first came up the east stair, and my eyes were not dry, and I was not ashamed of it. Then I went back to my post. That is the part that matters most, and it is the part the songs always leave out, so I will not. I went back to my post. The honors were given and the wrong was answered, and the queen had bowed her head over my hand. And then the audience was over, as all things are over, and there were two children who would need their door watched that night exactly as they had needed it watched every other night, and I was the man who watched it. And so I went back, and took up my place at the head of the children's gallery where the corridor turns, and stood, with my eyes forward and my face still, and listened to the small sounds the sleeping house makes and, more importantly, the ones it does not. I stood that post for many more years. Nothing like that night ever came up the east stair again. The dark, once shown a held door, tends to look for an easier one elsewhere, which is the quiet unsung work that watchfulness does, the disasters it prevents by simply being there, that no one ever counts because they never happen. I trained the men of the Queen's own watch, and I taught them the only thing worth teaching, which is not how to strike, for anyone can be taught to strike, but how to hold, how to keep the one of action on a leash so short it does not show, how to wait for the wrong to commit itself fully and not one instant past, how to find the seam between too soon and too late, which is the width of a single heartbeat, and how to be the kind of man who, when that heartbeat comes, after years of standing still for nothing, is still ready to step into it. I told them, every one of them, the thing the Lady Briarwyn had told me on my first night. No one comes to these children on a piece of paper. They come on our word, or they do not come. And I told them the other thing, the thing I had learned for myself on the stair and in the rose court, and in the gallery where the Queen stood frozen in the dark, that the stillness is not the absence of the strength. The stillness is the strength, gathered and waiting and disciplined, a drawn bow that looks at rest. And the honor is not in the loosing of it, but in the holding of it, in refusing to do the violent thing too soon, in standing at the door you most want to break and not breaking it until the one right instant, and then letting out exactly as much as the instant needs, and not 1 ounce more, and gathering it back and standing still again. Malin and Joran grew up. They grew up kind, both of them. The prince still thanks the servants, all of them now, I have seen it, and they grew old enough to have children of their own, and those children sleep, tonight, behind a door watched by a man I trained, who learned from me what I learned from an old governess and one bad night, that the most that a guardian can hope for is to do his work so well that the ones he protects never know there was anything to protect them from. The children of that house have slept, for 3 generations now, never once feeling the cold breath of a night that was turned away from them in the dark before they ever woke. That is the whole of what I was for. I traded their gratitude for their safety and asked nothing back, and I would make the trade again 10,000 times, and I have never once been sorry. The Queen kept her word. To the end of her long reign, I am told, she held her children and then her grandchildren a moment longer at the door each night than the other mothers did, and they never knew why, and she never told them, and the only 2 living souls who knew the why of it were an old queen and an old guard, standing at opposite ends of the same held door, keeping, between us, the one secret that was worth more for never being spoken. I am very old now, and I have laid down the post at last, and there is not much of the long story left to tell. But when I cannot sleep, and an old guard sleeps lightly, the ledger of a lifetime of corridors still keeping its watch in him, I lie in the dark and I listen, out of the habit of a whole life, for the small sounds a sleeping house makes and the ones it does not. And I think of a strange tread on the east stair, and a good honest face, and a heartbeat held to its very edge, and a mother frozen in a gallery in the gray hour, unable for one long moment to make a sound, hearing at last how near the dark had come, and how narrow the thing was that turned it. It was narrow. It was the width of a single heartbeat, and a tread I did not know, and the order an old woman used up her wax. It was as narrow as that. And it held. That is all, that is the whole of it. The door held and the children slept, and they never knew, and that, and not the ribbons and not the honors and not even the queen's head bowed over an old guard's hand, is the thing I am proudest of in the whole of my long life. That on the one night it ever mattered, the man at the door did not move too soon, and did not move too late, and stood and held, and the dark went away empty into the night, and 2 children grew up never knowing it had ever come at all. That is what a guard is for. It is the only thing he is for, and it is enough.